This is Charlie Rose.
George Soros is here. He is a billionaire investor, philanthropist, political activist, and author. His 10th and latest book, The New Paradigm for Financial Markets, The Credit Crisis of 2008, and What It Means, was recently published as an electronic book. In it, he writes that the global flight from the weakened dollar will have, quote, far-reaching political consequences and raise the specter of a breakdown in the prevailing world order. I am pleased to have him back at this table. A breakdown in the prevailing world order. Tell me how you see that.
Well, you went off at the deep end,
right?
Yes, indeed, in your introduction. But for the
I went to the pregnant point.
Since the end of the Second World War, basically, the dollar was the generally accepted reserve currency, right. And that status is now in doubt because the willingness to hold dollars has been reduced. And this crisis in particular brings that point home, because each time you have a recession threatening, you've got to lower interest rates,
right.
Put a lot more dollars in circulation. You have to increase, provide fiscal stimulus. Our budget deficit is going from $162 billion in 2007 to $450 billion in 2008, and it's going to be more like $500 billion in 2008.
And that's what percentage of GDP?
Well, I don't know. That's about, I don't know.
But because some people say as long as it's less than 5% of GDP, it's okay, a deficit.
Yes, but nevertheless, it's a tripling in 1 year. And of course, as we are heading into a recession, 2009 is bound to be bigger. And that puts a lot of pressure on the dollar. It also puts pressure on the Fed, that it can't go overboard in lowering interest rates, because the decline in the dollar then translates into core inflation. Because now the renminbi, the Chinese currency, is appreciating. At least 10%, but it's more like 15 to 20%. And that will bring maybe 1 or 2% increase in core inflation.
Right.
The goods in Walmart will cost more, not, of course, 15%
because of the inflation. But I thought we wanted the Chinese currency to appreciate.
Yes, we've been pushing for it because it's undervalued,
right.
But it does have that effect. And so, and also the fact that people don't want to hold dollars, and there isn't really a very attractive currency alternative, because the euro is overvalued. Of course, it is still going up, even though it's very overvalued, because people want to diversify. But actually, what is happening is that the holders of dollars are now diversifying away from currencies to other kinds of holdings. So you have these sovereign wealth funds,
right,
which now amount to $2.5 trillion and growing at a very rapid rate.
Let's just stay with the dollar. What is the appropriate value, you think, of the euro?
In terms of cups of coffee, how much it costs here and there.
Right.
But that's purchasing power parity. But you see all the people in New York who come over to shop here because it's cheaper. But that's not what determines the value of the currency. It's a matter of supply and demand.
But if, in fact, the currency is devalued and the dollar goes down, and therefore people are buying more American goods,
it helps to cushion the recession. It's a positive. It's actually an adjustment that was needed, because we have built up an ever-rising current account deficit. It was over 6% of the GDP. That's now declining, and that's actually a healthy adjustment. But it's also a very painful adjustment, because for the last X years, the average American did not have any increase in wages to speak of.
Absolutely.
But he could buy goods cheaper at Walmart and better quality, and he owned a house, And that house went up in value more than 10% a year. So he could go and refinance his mortgage, and that was his savings. Now, that was a bubble. The bubble has burst. Housing prices are now falling, and these are very, very significant figures. The housing prices are now falling at an accelerating rate. Last month, they were falling at an annual rate of 25%, which is very rapid. We are now at the height of the season for selling houses, and nevertheless, prices are very soft. And you have an increasing number of foreclosures because there's been a lot of really loose, lax lending in the last few years. You have about 6 or 7 million subprime mortgages, and about 40% of them is going to default. And then you've got these adjustable rate option adjustable rate mortgages where you don't actually have to pay the interest, you can just add it to the principal. And a lot of those are now blowing up, and they will result in defaults. So you really have millions of defaults facing you. And as prices fall, more and more house owners will have negative equity. So the decline in housing prices is going to be much steeper than the authorities lead you to believe. And it's also going to occur more sooner and faster than they expect.
Leading to what?
Well, leading to a recession.
We're already in a recession, aren't we?
Well, probably,
right.
Yes. But it's going to get worse. And the only point where I would say I differ from Bernanke is that he says that in the second half of the year things are going to rebound. I see absolutely no foundation.
No rebound at all, even a temporary rebound?
No, I don't see it. I just don't see because things are still accelerating on the downside.
So the decline in the housing market extends into 2009?
Right. Yes.
So, two questions. One, how bad can it get? And who suffers? And then what does it impact on Wall Street? What's the impact on the capital markets? What's the impact on average Americans in terms of wages and jobs and providing for their families? And what's the impact on America's relative position in the global economy?
And those are the two important questions. And, of course, you cannot make any firm predictions because a lot depends on how the authorities respond to the challenge. And I argue that they will have to put taxpayers' money to work to arrest the decline in housing prices.
What does that mean?
It means that you've really got to find ways to minimize the number of people who lose their homes because of foreclosure, because that does two things. It exacerbates the pressure on housing prices, so it's self-reinforcing, and that it has devastating social consequences, because this crisis is hitting certain particular areas and communities. And it's disproportionately falling on African Americans. And very interestingly, it's really the upwardly mobile in Maryland, where I have a foundation. It's the district which has the richest African American community that is the most heavily hit, because they bought into this ownership, and the form of ownership they chose was housing, so they don't have other assets to sort of compensate for the decline in the value of houses. So it's really very, very severe social consequences.
So you're suggesting it will tear at the social fabric of the country?
Yes, yes. So action will be necessary, not only because of that, but because economically it's the right thing to do. Because you need to do something to arrest the housing decline, because otherwise it's going to overshoot on the downside in exactly the same way as it overshot on the upside. And the main thesis of the book is that both the authorities and the market participants have been relying on a false interpretation, a false understanding of how financial markets work. They assumed that markets tend towards equilibrium and that the deviations from that equilibrium are random. And that is false.
Deviations are what then, if they're not random?
The deviations from the equilibrium are random.
Right.
So if you put together a bunch of mortgages and then you slice them up, you have a much better risk distribution than if you take individual mortgages. Therefore, they are safer when you package them together and securitize them. This assumes that there can't be a systemic risk, that you can't have a bubble which drives up the prices first and then drives them down. That was left out of account when these packages were put together. And all the other synthetic instruments, many of the trading techniques that certain hedge funds use, they're all built on this assumption. And the regulators have also bought into this idea. I call it market fundamentalism, that basically, markets are self-correcting, and therefore you don't leave it to the market to regulate themselves. And that's false. And this is what has landed us in the present difficulty.
You have said, and I think you said that this is the worst market crisis in 60 years.
Yes, our lifetime.
Our lifetime, since World War II.
Right. I don't remember the one in the 30s.
I don't either. So, who made the mistakes? I mean, you have criticized the laissez-faire government of both Margaret Thatcher and also Ronald Reagan.
Right.
But
I think that's when, you see, I think that we basically have two bubbles working at the same time. There's the housing bubble, which basically started in 2000. When
because of these new securities and the way they were sliced and diced?
Well, that's part of it, but basically what happened was we had another bubble, which was the IT bubble, and in order to get out of that bubble, the interest rates were lowered, and then they were kept very low, 1%, until 2004, and that got the housing bubble going. So that's a relatively recent...
Meaning the interest rate was so low, people were buying houses they couldn't afford if interest rates changed, if they were adjustable and changed.
Right. It was a tremendous supply of money and led to this housing bubble. But then you have something which I call the super bubble. Ever since the end of the Second World War, credit has grown much faster than the GNP. And it has helped the growth of the GNP. And then starting in 1980, with Reagan coming to becoming president here, Margaret Thatcher in England, you had this misconception about markets, which are called market fundamentalism, that you leave the markets to their own devices. And the two together led to what the globalization of financial markets, the liberalization of financial markets, and this reinforced credit expansion. And interestingly, because markets don't tend towards equilibrium, but left to their own devices always get into trouble, and you have a number of crises, and each time the authorities came in and bailed you out.
So basically, if you look at what's being done today by the Federal Reserve, by lowering interest rates, by guaranteeing loans to bail out Bear Stearns, if you look at the stimulus package, and if you look at the regulations announced by Secretary Paulson, are any of those measures the right direction?
Yes, the fiscal stimulation, bailing out Bear Stearns, all those things are right.
Because of confidence or because it changes the buying habits?
No, because it is the job of the Federal Reserve not to allow the financial system to collapse.
That's what every central bank is supposed to do.
That's their job, and they did that job. But you see, that means that they had to intervene, right? And so the error was not to recognize that if you are in the credit creation business, then you need that protection. And if you need that protection, then you need to be regulated so that you avoid the bubble from developing where the Fed has to come in. It's the job of the Fed to prevent asset bubbles from developing. But that task has not been accepted.
Not been accepted
by the authorities. They have not recognized that they have to do that. Greenspan spoke about irrational exuberance very early on.
But he was at that time was talking about the IT market.
Yeah, and it wasn't. People didn't like it. They stopped. He stopped. He didn't. And generally,
but he was right.
He was right, but he didn't follow through. He didn't do anything.
Yeah.
You see now. It is really the job of the regulators.
And how long will this period last?
I think this is more
Wealth
serious.
Destruction and
it's more. This is bigger than previous ones, because in the previous ones you could count on the Fed and the authorities to get you out of it, and this time they are more constrained. They're trying. They're doing the lowered interest rates and so on, and it's not enough.
So where are we then?
Well, we are on the verge, and we are now entering a recession.
We're in a recession, and you're saying that the Fed is impotent to do anything because...
Well, they have done something.
Well, yes, but you're saying beyond that. I mean, there's not much more. So, and if it's getting worse, and their options to make a difference are restricted,
are limited.
Then there's nothing. There's no good news around the corner.
There isn't, but they need to do more. And this is one of the things that I argue, that they have to directly address the issue of foreclosures, and while you have to protect the right to foreclosure, because without it, mortgages would have no value, and you would have no mortgages. So you have to have but you have to reduce the use of that mechanism by modifying the terms of the loans, reducing the...
Or a moratorium on foreclosure? Or?
No, moratorium is no good. That's too drastic. You have to encourage renegotiating, modifying the terms of the mortgage, because everybody would be better off if you could do it without foreclosure. So that's one thing. The other thing is you've got to recognize that you've been working with the false paradigm. And this is very, very hard to accept. You can't... It's
the false paradigm that markets correct themselves.
Yeah, and it's almost unbelievable that this fabulous, powerful global financial system should be built on false premises. It's hard to believe, and yet it is true.
Let's assume you and I could put at this table the heads of the major financial services companies here, Citigroup and J.P. Morgan Chase, and
they would not agree with what I'm saying.
Exactly.
They would not.
None of them would agree with what you said. For the most, you can find one, maybe.
I think that maybe deep down, and in view of what's happening now, maybe they would agree more, and that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because this is the time to drive the point home.
Okay, suppose I could at the same time put here the head of the central banks of the major industrial nations, the so-called Group of Eight. Would they agree?
I think Volcker would agree, but of course he's no longer head of...
central bank.
I think I could name a few others who would agree, but
Trichet would agree or not?
No. Trichet would not. I don't think Bernanke would. And generally, what I'm saying is a bit revolutionary. And that's why I said it 20 years ago.
Is there any irony here in the fact, I mean, some people are going to listen to this and say, wait a minute, this is a guy who cleaned up in the market, who became a billionaire, who bet at the right time on certain key currency exchanges and has done quite well, and has created enormous wealth, and yet he is basically saying that the market doesn't self-correct, and the market left to itself will drive us deeper into economic disaster.
Well, I think that...
So capital markets don't work. is what you're saying.
Well, they work, but they are imperfect. They are imperfect.
No, but you're saying beyond the imperfect. You're just saying that capital markets, they don't work in a sense that
there are times when they break down.
And we're at a time right now where the capital markets have broken down.
That's right. I mean, everybody knows it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying anything. That's not news.
Okay, so
but think of this. Maybe the fact that I was able to make 40% a year on my capital had something to do with my knowing this while other people.
Well, but if I looked at your investment, if I looked at your philosophy and then your execution, would I see that? In other words, are you suggesting your investment success is because you practice this principle that markets are not self-correcting?
Yes, in a way, but you see,
reflectively.
But you see, what my theory tells me is that there's a great deal of uncertainty, much greater uncertainty about markets, how they evolve, than we recognize, and therefore, I make many mistakes, and so from time to time, I do it right. At other times, I do it wrong.
Well, people say that's the nature of markets.
Well, that's the nature. Yeah.
That's what they say. Yeah. Markets are about people doing it right and doing it wrong, and on balance, it sort of evens itself out.
But it doesn't even itself out.
Fair
That's the difference.
Okay, so in this global economic system we have today, where you've got nations like China and India growing in double-digit growth, are they immune from this?
No.
And is it the principal burden of what is happening to the capital markets going to be in the United States and Europe?
The second part is yes. This is basically falling on the United States and UK, to a lesser extent, continental Europe.
We'll go ahead.
Yeah. And China will be affected, of course, because the dynamism of their economy is exports, and their exports will be.
So they may slip into single-digit growth rates,
and they may slow down, but they
into single-digit growth rates.
Yes. Well, actually, you see, they've got some other problems because actually they have the opposite problem to ours. They actually have an asset bubble right now because the currency is appreciating at 15%, let's say, and interest rates are 5-6%. So if you can invest in China in government bonds there, you get a 20% return. So actually, in addition to all the trade inflows into China, there's a lot of capital rushing to China.
So the wise money is going into China to buy their bonds,
or invest in property or whatever. So if you got a lot of money, your advice to them is go to China. You've got a kind of asset bubble.
Well, then a bubble will burst. When is it going to burst?
Well, that's the question. So it's not so safe to go there, but as long as you are aware of it, it's not a bad thing.
Again, this is what makes markets.
Well, that's right.
Some have said the following. The Chinese were worried about an overheated economy, and it took an American recession to do it.
Right. That's correct. That's right.
So we have this global economic order.
Right.
Where does that put us? And what is the new reality for America as an economic power?
It is impairing that power.
Eroding it?
Eroding it. I wrote another book, The Bubble of American Supremacy, where I used this financial analysis of analogy of bubbles to President Bush's pursuit of American supremacy. And I said it's going to bust. And it has actually done tremendous damage to America's political and military power and influence in the world. So that's we have suffered a big setback. Now we have a sort of a bit of the equivalent of that happening in the financial sphere. That is really what is happening. So the unquestioned dominance of the dollar is now questioned. And this creates a period of turmoil, just as politically you have turmoil because the world order, the political world order, comes back to your original question. The political world order was built on America as the dominant power. And then America failed in performing the role that was called upon, and that created a lot of uncertainty and turmoil in the world. And now the same thing is happening in the financial sphere. And there is no valid alternative to the dollar. The euro is not qualified to be the reserve currency. There's no, the renminbi certainly isn't, right? I mean,
the Chinese currency.
Yeah, there's no question of that. So therefore,
and the euro, you said, not either.
Euro.
So where are we left with?
So actually, you have this flight from currencies, which has created a commodities bubble.
While
gold, food, copper, metals, and China is trying to invest in any kind of raw material in Africa. So you have an asset bubble, while you have this negative thing, the bursting of the housing bubble in the US. You have a global commodities bubble developing.
So everywhere we look, there's a bubble developing.
Well, there's a bubble,
existing.
A bubble growing or bursting.
Yeah.
That is the way markets function, and it's high time that you should recognize that and stop talking about equilibrium.
Right.
It is the job of the people in charge of macroeconomic policy and the regulators to stop the bubbles from growing too big, so that when they deflate, they don't do too much.
And that's what they failed to do here.
And that is what they failed to do here.
And so we have a big mess.
And that's the problem. And I think it can be corrected if you recognize how financial markets work, and then you recognize that the authorities have this responsibility.
And then you have the political will to do it.
Well, then you develop the political will. And then you realize that it's not enough to control money supply, that this whole monetarist doctrine is a false doctrine that feeds right into this market fundamentalist ideology, that in fact you have to control the growth of credit. And it's not, you can't control credit purely through money. You have to take into account the prevailing bias, which may be optimistic or pessimistic. So you have to actually limit the amount of leverage that people can put on. You have to put on some limits on the borrowing capacity, and you have to impose stricter limits on banks if they lend to hedge funds that leverage 6 times their equity.
And what limits would you put on the banks?
Well, you would have to limit, as I say, they would have to
treat the debt-equity ratio?
They would have to have minimum reserve requirements. There's very interestingly, because there is this has to be done now that the markets are global. This has to be done internationally, and it has been done internationally. There is a Basel agreement on the reserve requirements of banks.
Right.
Then there's Basel I, and there's Basel II, which is just coming in, which actually left it to the banks to determine the riskiness of their lending. There was the regulators abdicated the responsibility of deciding how risky their business is, because the business got very complicated. They couldn't understand it. But they said, well, the banks know what they're doing, so we just go by their risk. So that now, I think, is going to go out, and you'll need Basel III.
That's a failed idea.
Failed idea. And you'll need Basel III, which will put limits on leverage.
Where are you putting your money? Where's your money going?
I think I'm trying to balance things, so I'm not losing my capital. And basically, since most of my investments are long, most of my macro positions are short to balance them.
All right. Are you optimistic about anything?
Oh, yes. I mean, I'm generally speaking optimistic because the fact that, let's say, this system proved to be imperfect, you know, it's natural because all human constructs are imperfect. That's the sort of the fundamental theory. And therefore, the big mistake you make is you think that just because socialism failed and government intervention in the economy failed, therefore markets are perfect. And you could make another mistake now, saying that because markets have failed, we have to regulate without,
right.
you know,
without wisdom.
Right. Now, you know, the regulators are also human. And what's worse, they are bureaucratic. And so you really only want to regulate as little as possible. But you need to understand that markets are imperfect.
Yeah, but see, I mean, this is just like everything else. It comes down to balance.
Right.
Trying to figure out the right balance.
That's exactly right.
Thank you for coming. Good to see you. George Soros, his book now, an electronic book, is called, guess what we've been talking about, The New Paradigm for Financial Markets, the Credit Crisis of 2008, and what it means. And we'll be right back. Stay with us. On the next Charlie Rose, a conversation with actor George Clooney and singer-songwriter Norah Jones. Dame Helen Mirren is here for 4 decades. She has acted on television, in movies, and in the theater. Makes her a triple threat, it does. Some of her work includes Gosford Park, Elizabeth, and Prime Suspect. In 2007, she won the Oscar for The Queen. Here is a look at her in action.
Yes, Merlin, that's it. Set the world to rights. Call the dragon. Mend the sword. Speak the charm of making.
Assaulted by both one's parents in the same evening. What is family life coming to?
I was told it would be so. In England, always the prince hates the king.
Oh, is that why he's mad?
If he is mad, sir, you have made him so by your idleness. The day the Brits go home. The day the bloody Brits go home, that's all you people can think about, isn't it? Well, my life won't change either way.
How are you? I'm Mr. Weissman's man.
The Countess of Trentham.
Yes, make sure they're properly labelled. Put them down there, all right?
Where am I?
You're in the stable block with the grooms. Her ladyship is in the Chinese room. Elsie, you're looking at January.
February.
March.
April!
Dead by my orders. Oh my...
Jameson! How are you? No!
You weren't gathering evidence against Zigic. You were going after Lukic. This is the meeting we had never took place.
I thought it never did take place.
Did you never cross your mind you might actually be wrong?
Yes.
You're off this investigation. Take a week's leave.
And it is my belief that they will any moment reject this mood, which is being stirred up by the press, in favor of a period of restrained grief and sober private mourning. That's the way we do things in this country. Quietly, with dignity.
Her newest project is her memoir. It is called In the Frame, My Life in Words and Pictures. I am pleased to have Dame Helen Mirren back at this table. Look at this. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Yes, thank you.
There?
I know, my baby, one of my many babies.
So why did you decide... And here?
Yes.
So why a memoir now?
Oh, God. I was asked, I've been asked over the last 10 years to write a memoir or an autobiography, and I resisted it because I couldn't think of how to do it. And then a very good friend of mine sort of suggested this picture format, which is very easy because you don't have to write so much. But
Yes,
actually,
right.
in the end, I did write. I was asked to write 15,000 words, and I wrote 56,000 words. So it sort of expanded because I really enjoyed the writing process.
The process or the actual, I mean, you mean the process suggests there's something about the process you enjoyed rather than simply putting your thoughts down and your feelings down.
Well, isn't that
on
sort
paper?
of the process?
Okay, fair
you know. It's those quiet moments with the computer and your memory. My memory is terrible. But, you know, memory is such a wonderful thing because you can... It's like, how can I explain it? It's sort of like a river or a little stream bubble, a brook that starts bubbling and then more and more and
That's
more
exactly
stuff
what
comes.
Michael Caine once said to me. He said, it's much easier than you think.
It is.
Once you get started,
Yes.
things that you hadn't thought about, that you couldn't imagine accessing, come back to you.
They come back. And you can go on a sort of memory trip.
Yeah.
Of just remembering one thing. You like the walk to school in the morning, and then you remember the pavement, you remember the flower bush that you passed, you remember your uniform, you remember ironing your uniform, and then you know, and then all of these things start coming up that that you never realised you carried in your brain. The brain is a wonderful, wonderful thing.
We'll show some of these photographs, but you also have to face the question as to when am I being too honest, too candid, too revealing, and who might get hurt in this if I do this?
Yes, I didn't feel the need to address that because I didn't feel like attacking or criticising anyone. There are people in my life who deserve to be attacked and criticised, but I just didn't. I don't know. It's mean-spirited and vain in a peculiar way, and I just didn't feel the need for that. I wanted the book really to be about the pleasure of my life, the love of my life, the love in my life. And, you know, and on that level it came very, very easily. I put the knife into one person.
Who was that?
Oh, I'm not going to say. I'll have to find him in the pages of the book.
But you've hit on the target that I want to talk about, the pleasure of your life, the love of your life, what was inside. But let's talk about early times first. What was home like growing up with you?
Well, I grew up in an extremely small house, a family of 3 children, in a lower income sort of environment, but an environment full of contradiction, which I think was very healthy. My parents were atheists, and my father was probably a communist or extreme socialist, but they sent me to a Catholic convent school. Yeah. So that in itself sort of describes the sort of wonderful sort of contradiction in my life as a kid, which I think is very healthy.
They loved to talk about issues at the dinner table.
They did. We had no television. We didn't really have a radio.
And small talk was not a big thing.
No, gossip, no. I mean, I'm not saying they were strict or made us, but they loved to talk about, you know, issues like, is there such a thing as a soul? You know, what is art? And
yes.
Stuff like that. And so I was always encouraged to express my opinion and to have opinions and to talk, but very much within that sort of family environment.
Yeah, where did this idea of being a performer come from?
I don't know, you know. I mean, I think it has to be genetic to a certain extent, and certainly on the Russian side of my family, right, there was always an interest in the theatre. In fact, one of my ancestors in Russia started, in a way, the first theatre in Russia. He started a surf theatre on his estates in Russia in the sort of, 18th century, 17th, 18th century. And it was one of the sort of very first sort of formal theatres. But so I guess it's there. My mother was an enormous drama queen, so it might have come from my British working class side of my family. I don't know.
Now, who was it that said, I think it was it Mary Mildred, who said, beware of fear?
Mother Mary Mildred, yes.
She was your what? Headmistress.
My headmistress, a nun, you know, she was a Catholic nun in the convent school that I was. And when I went for my first interview with her, and I was, of course, extremely frightened, she just said this very wise thing, which was, beware of fear, Helen. Just be careful with fear. And it takes you many years to understand the wisdom in something like that.
Come here.
Come here.
There it is. Huh?
Yes.
When did you do that?
I did it when I did in Minnesota on an Indian reservation. My hands are cool.
Yeah, they are.
It's
See how
cold.
mine are warm.
Yes, yours are warm.
Yeah.
Well, you've been sitting in this cosy studio. It's
because
cold
people
out
talk
there.
about that tattoo and why you got
They
that tattoo.
do. Yes, I got
That's the first
drunk,
time
that's why I got it.
But is it like a badge of something now?
No.
You kind of like it now?
I love it now because it's become like the coolest thing.
It is.
And the straight thing to be tattooed. I mean, when I was tattooed, it was only Hell's Angels and, you know, prisoners, gay prisoners who got tattooed.
And you did it because you were drunk?
Partly because I was drunk, but also because I kind of wanted a tattoo. I'd been with Peter Brook. I'd just been performing in a prison in France, and the prisoners were mostly gay, and they had these beautiful eye makeup tattooed and tears tattooed, which is the traditional prison tattoo. And I thought, I'd like a tattoo.
So why not?
That was when, as I say, nobody got tattoos. Now it's just become amazingly sort of ubiquitous.
And ubiquitous, and women have them all over their body in all kinds of
especially
interesting
on
places.
all their
And
backs,
especially you see them on the back, right,
arms.
to where these...
Yes, which is sexy.
Know, what was it that got you on stage and got you interested in the National Youth Theatre and got you at the Royal Shakespeare and got you to Peter Brook's?
Well, you know, a love of the world of the imagination, I suspect. The ability to sort of shut the rest of the world out and enter into a magical world. For me, it was Shakespeare that took me into the world of the imagination in terms of drama. And I was just so completely blown away by the first Shakespearean production I saw. What are you laughing at?
Just remembering they call you the Stratford sex queen.
Yeah, well, you know, what can you do? It was not my fault.
Oh, really?
No, it
Whose
was
fault
nothing.
was it?
No, it was the fault of the bloody journalist who wrote that. It was like,
all right, let's look at some pictures here, too.
Back.
Who is this?
That's my sister and my brother.
Yeah.
My sister, obviously, me in the middle.
And this?
That was a costume fitting. I've always loved costumes, and that was my first proper costume fitting at the Royal Shakespeare Company. I was playing Cressida. You can see what a poser I am already.
Did you have a favourite Shakespearean character?
Rosalind's a great character.
Oh, here's the one I was looking for.
Oh, there's the sex queen.
Stratford's
See,
very
that's
own
not very
sex
sexy.
queen. No, it's not, especially. It's not.
I know.
But, I mean, it does have that kind of come-hither look, they might say.
Oh, maybe, I don't know.
Come hither on the grass. Come hither on the grass with me.
I must find the name of that journalist and send him a
thank you note.
Thank you note. Thank you for nothing.
Yes. Okay, this is Two-Way Mirror.
Yes, working with the great...
It looks like Arthur Miller.
It is the great Arthur Miller.
Yeah. So what impact did Peter Brook have on you?
Oh, my goodness. Well, probably the work that I did with him, which was only over years, probably reverberating in me, you know, in my professional life throughout.
And, okay,
yes.
Because what?
Because I think that he was the person who truly understood. You know, he is a great genius, and truly understood that every actor is an absolute individual, you know, and you cannot form yourself. And actors are always looking at other actors saying, oh, why can't I do that? Oh, they're so brilliant. Why can't I be like that? Why can't I be like her? And actually, all you really have is yourself. And it's finding the truth of yourself that you have to sort of present on the stage or in the film. How do you do that?
Find the truth of yourself?
You don't find it by looking. That's a terribly Zen sort of answer.
Exactly.
You don't find it by looking. And, of course, it's... you know, why actors are so confused, because they're having to look at themselves and try and find themselves all the time in order to reproduce, even though you're obviously often playing a character far beyond yourself. But every character you play always carries some of yourself within it. And the only way you can really perform any character really well is by giving it of yourself, of your own emotional, you know, story, your own psychology.
But essentially you're saying you can't go in search of it, you just have to wait for it to come.
In a way, and then that's a kind of stupid, dumb answer, because you go, what the hell does that mean?
All right. So, and then along comes in 2006, as we go down memory lane.
Yes.
Prime Suspect. No,
yes.
It ended in 2006.
Earlier. Ended in 2006.
It came along.
Started in 1980 something or other.
Did you know what this could be for you when?
No, you never do, Charlie. It's always these things come kind of, you know, sideways. They hit you always from the side.
And who was the brilliant person that decided this was perfect for you?
I think probably Sally Head, who was the head of drama at Granada at the time. And maybe Linda, who wrote it.
Yeah.
I don't know. You never know. These things, you know, come upon you mysteriously.
But when you settled in the first year, did you say, man, this feels good, this is comfortable for me, I like the way this...
Well, it was a great role. Any great role, you know, you feel like that. And it was a, you know, the first episode was wonderfully written by Linda, and she created a great, great character. And and then as we went on with it, I mean, it was a wonderful way to sort of hopefully reflect the world around you. You know, that was how I saw it.
It was about a culture,
mostly.
too.
About a culture, absolutely, and a history now, because, you know, it went through over, I don't know, 15 years or something, was it? It was a long time.
Yeah, but we got to know you and your flaws and your strengths and,
you
know, your sense of authenticity, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Didn't we?
Yes, I hope so.
Were you sad to see it leave? Yeah.
No, I mean...
Oh, because you were a big Hollywood movie star by then.
No, not at all, no.
Oh, I'm an Oscar winner. I do not have time for Prime Suspect anymore in my life.
Darling, no, it ended long before I won an Oscar.
I know that.
So I know.
An Oscar?
An Oscar.
You won an Oscar?
I won an Oscar. I was writing a little piece about that, actually.
Oh, you were?
Yes.
What were you saying?
I was sort of just describing the whole process, the whole evening, you know, in a very short little piece.
You were perfect in it. I mean, you know, your perfect little answering speech was great.
No, yes, that was. I thought about that. I had to think about it because you couldn't, you know, it was too delicate with all of the responsibility of the Queen and Britain and people's, you know, anything about the royal family in England, as you probably know, Britain, you know, people are sort of, you know, just waiting for you to make a slip. So I had to be careful.
Well, not just careful, but I mean, people had a feeling.
Funny, I hope.
Yeah, funny, and they just thought you got her, and B, what I think surprised some people is you liked her. You grew to understand her and admire her.
Well, I don't know about understand, you know.
I would think understand more than like, but you're saying like more than understand?
But certainly like, and maybe love.
Maybe loved her?
Yes,
because...
maybe loved her. I think a combination of complicated things, partly because she was so very much of my parents' generation, although younger. But, you know, she came out of the pre-war and then the war generation of Britain, and those were the years that formed her character and her personality and that incredible sense of discipline
and
responsibility and of a kind of sacrifice, and adhering to it through thick and thin and absolutely never wavering. You know, never wavering. And really extraordinary. And as I studied her, and the penny dropped more and more about who this person was, that I'd kind of taken for granted, like sort of Big Ben, you know, pass it a million times in my life, never really pay attention. When I had to actually pay attention, the enormity and the impressiveness of what she'd done and achieved sort of, you know, came upon me.
No, I know you don't like these kind of questions, but I'm obsessed by them. Was there
That's honest. I'm dying to know what it is now.
Well, was there... How did you get inside? What was the hook? What was the way that you sort of said, aha?
There was a little tiny bit of film that I watched just over and over again. It was only about 12 seconds of film. And
12 seconds?
Yes, and it was her getting out of a car when she was about 12 or 13. And at that point, she didn't know that she was going to be Queen, you know, because remember, she wasn't brought up from the moment she was born. It was something that slowly dawned upon her, first, obviously, with the abdication of her uncle, and then with the fact that her parents didn't have any more children, which they could have done. So she didn't know that she was going to be Queen. She's getting out of one of those enormous black cars, you know, and she's about 12 or 13, and she's obviously been told, you get out and you put your hand out and you are polite to the man who will greet you. This little, beautiful, beautiful little girl and this big man in a suit, and he's putting her... And she just does it so correctly, with such kind of gravity and grace, and, you know, she's doing exactly what she was told to do, but she's doing it with such, as I say, gravity and grace, and what's the word? Not honour. I can't think of the right word.
Dignity.
Dignity. Thank you. Thank you, Charlie. Dignity, exactly the word I'm looking for. As a 12-year-old, 13-year-old. And it makes me cry every time I look at it. It's so beautiful. Wow. And she was she was a laughing little girl. You see, you know, early film of her skipping along, laughing, this beautiful smile that she had. I sound so sycophantic, and I don't mean to, but she did. And looking after her sister, making sure that her sister doesn't mess up, you know, even as a young girl.
All right, let's look at some of these photographs here. This is you and your husband.
Yes.
Yes,
exactly.
Are you in a new movie that he's directing?
We just finished it. We wrapped literally the day before yesterday. No, it's called Love Ranch. I play the madam of a brothel in Nevada in the 70s.
All right, look at this. But, this is just great. There you go.
Yes, Prime Suspect.
Prime Suspect
absolutely.
Pictures. All
yes.
right. There he is, Clive.
That's Gosford Park.
Yeah, with Clive on. Yeah.
Yes.
And this is...
You don't have any pictures there of my Russian... the beautiful pictures here.
Oh, show it to us then.
I'll show you. I love... These pictures just appeared miraculously out of Russia just before I had the book done.
Well, maybe I do, but no. Here, is this it?
Yes.
There
yes,
you go.
and this one, which I love, of
we'll show that one
my
in a moment.
grandparents' wedding.
These photographs were found in Moscow in 2007.
Yes.
Astounded to see pictures of my grandparents' wedding.
Yes.
That would be here.
That's it, yes.
All right, and then
exactly.
this
is their wedding. The actual wedding of them coming out of the church in Russia. I mean, I love that picture.
And how did you find these in 2007?
Thank God for journalists. A very good research journalist in Moscow sort of had heard about my Russian ancestry and just started doing research. And it transpired that a relative, not a blood relative, but a relative by marriage, was a historian and had kept, I had all the letters from Russia to my grandfather, but this historian had kept all the letters from my grandfather to Russia.
In the frame,
yes,
the memoir of Dame Helen.
It's
you like
to be
this
dipped
Dame
into.
thing?
Not much, no. I don't much. I don't. I always forget about it, and people remind, like you remind me.
Well, see, I don't ever know what to say because some people, it's like, sir.
Yes, some people.
They want. Yes. They don't want you to forget.
No, right.
And other people are uncomfortable. They don't want you to say.
I'm the uncomfortable person, a little bit. I am. I don't. Anyway, I don't see myself like that at all.
I adore you.
Do you, Charlie?
Oh, I do. There is time.
Even after
Taylor
4 decades.
Taylor would give me another black eye. One's enough.
Yes.
Much success, my dear.
Thank you. Thank you very
Pleasure
much, Charlie. Lovely that you had me on. Thank you.
Helen Mirren, thank you for joining us. See you next time.